The title Gray Goo may be the biggest clue. What if the title of Episode 8 is not describing what happened to the world, but warning us about what is still out there? Gray Goo. Those two words immediately sound like something technological, something artificial, and most importantly, something that can spread beyond human control. And that may be exactly why this title deserves more attention than it is getting. Because Silo has spent 3 seasons convincing us that the biggest mystery is the world outside. Why is it toxic? What destroyed civilization? Why can't anyone survive beyond the silo? But episode May 8th be quietly shifting the question. Instead of asking what happened outside, we may need to ask, what was created before everything went wrong? The classic Gray Goo concept involves technology becoming capable of uncontrolled replication. There is no confirmation that Silo is literally using that concept in the same way. But as a theory, it fits the direction of the story extremely well. Season 3 has been taking us closer to the world that existed before the silos. And that means the silos themselves may not be the beginning of the story. They may be the aftermath. Imagine humanity developing a technology that seems completely manageable. It has a purpose. It solves a problem. Everyone believes they understand it. Then somebody discovers that the technology can do something it was never supposed to do. Maybe it can reproduce. Maybe it can spread. Maybe it can survive. And suddenly, the technology is no longer a tool. It becomes the problem. If something like that caused the collapse, then the silos would suddenly make much more sense. They wouldn't simply be underground shelters. They would be containment systems. And that interpretation changes almost everything. The silos may have been built for a reason we still don't understand. For generations, the people inside the silos have been taught one basic truth. The outside is deadly. But notice what the system doesn't tell them. It doesn't tell them exactly what happened. It doesn't give them the complete history. It doesn't encourage them to investigate. And it certainly doesn't want them communicating freely with other silos. At first, this looks like ordinary authoritarian control. But what if there is another explanation? What if the founders believe that revealing the truth would create a greater danger than hiding it? Think about how extreme the system actually is. People aren't simply discouraged from leaving. They're psychologically conditioned to fear it. Information about the past is restricted. Technology is controlled. And the safeguard exists as an ultimate measure of destruction. That's not the design of a normal community. That's the design of a system created by people who were terrified of something. Maybe the founders weren't asking, how do we build a society underground? Maybe they were asking, how do we make sure humanity never repeats the mistake that destroyed the old world? And that would make the silos much more tragic, because perhaps they were never intended to be prisons. They were intended to be protection. But protection without an exit plan eventually becomes imprisonment. Generations pass. The original creators disappear. Their reasons are forgotten. The rules remain. And eventually, nobody inside knows whether the system is protecting them or controlling them. That's exactly why Juliet is so dangerous. She isn't just breaking rules. She's challenging the reason those rules exist. Juliet is now facing a much bigger problem. Juliet started this journey looking for answers. Then she became someone who wanted freedom. Now she's becoming something much more dangerous. Someone who has to decide what other people deserve to know. And that's a completely different battle. Because finding the truth is one thing. Knowing what to do with the truth is another. Imagine Juliet discovers that the founders were hiding something genuinely dangerous. If she tells everyone, she could cause panic. If she keeps it secret, she becomes part of the system she has spent years fighting. And if she destroys the safeguard without understanding why it exists, she could accidentally remove the only thing protecting everyone. That's the perfect trap for Juliet. She knows the system is wrong, but she may not yet know what should replace it. And episode 8 could force her into that exact situation. Gus' secret could connect the ordinary silo to the bigger mystery. One of the most important clues heading into episode 8 is simple. Gus is going to reveal a secret. That sounds like a small development. It probably isn't. Because in Silo, the person holding a secret is often more important than the secret itself. Why has Gus kept this information hidden? What does he know? And why reveal it now? It could involve his personal history. It could involve mechanical. It could involve something that happened inside the silo years ago. But there is another possibility. Gus could know something about the structure itself. And that matters because mechanical is one of the few places where people interact directly with the physical systems keeping the silo alive. Power, water, machinery, infrastructure. These aren't just background details. They are the physical foundation of the entire civilization. And someone who understands those systems may know things the people in authority don't, or perhaps knows things they deliberately chose to forget. Imagine Gus reveals that there is a part of the silo that shouldn't exist. A sealed section, an old machine, a hidden system, something that predates the rules everyone follows today. Suddenly, Juliet's search for answers moves in a completely different direction. Everyone has been looking outside. But what if the next major clue is actually below them? 5. The safeguard may not be just a weapon. This could be the biggest misunderstanding of all. We've been looking at the safeguard as a weapon, a mechanism designed to destroy. But what if destruction isn't its real purpose? What if destruction is simply the final step of a containment protocol? Imagine the founders believed that something dangerous could spread from one silo to another. Maybe technology, maybe information, maybe something much worse. If one silo became compromised, the founders would need a way to isolate it before the problem reached everyone else. And the ultimate form of isolation would be simple. Destroy the silo. That's horrifying. But suddenly, the safeguard has a logic behind it. It wouldn't necessarily exist because the founders hated the people inside. It could exist because they were terrified of what might happen if something escaped. And that creates an incredibly uncomfortable question. What if Juliet is right that the system is cruel, but wrong about the danger the system was created to contain? That possibility would make her mission much more complicated. Because she can't simply destroy the old system. She has to understand it first. Charlotte's decision could explain how this all began. Then we have Charlotte. Her storyline takes place in the past, and that makes her decision potentially much more important than it appears. Because the past storyline isn't simply there to give us background information. It's showing us the chain of decisions that eventually created the world Juliet is living in. Charlotte is facing a life-changing choice. We don't know exactly what that choice will be, but imagine if it involves information. What if she has to decide whether something dangerous should be revealed? What if she has to protect someone? What if she has to choose between immediate safety and long-term consequences? That would fit one of Silo's most important ideas. People don't always create disasters because they are evil. Sometimes they create disasters because they believe they're doing the right thing. Someone sees a threat. They try to stop it. Someone else reacts. Another decision follows. And eventually, centuries later, an entire civilization is living inside the consequences. That could be the connection between Charlotte and Juliet. Charlotte represents the moment when a decision is made. Juliet represents the generation finally forced to live with it. And if episode 8 connects those two stories more directly, we may finally understand why the silos were created in the first place. Lucas and Kennedy could discover the one thing the silos were never supposed to see. Meanwhile, Lucas and Kennedy are outside. And that is potentially enormous. Because everyone inside the silo has been raised to believe that the outside world is dead and dangerous. But what happens if Lucas and Kennedy discover something that doesn't fit that story? It doesn't have to be a person. It doesn't have to be a functioning city. It could be something much smaller. A piece of technology. Evidence that someone was recently there. A functioning system. A location where the environment behaves differently. Anything that contradicts the official story could be devastating. Because once you prove one part of the story is false, people start questioning everything. And if the outside isn't simply dead, then Juliet has an entirely different problem. She isn't trying to escape a dead world. She may be trying to understand a world that still contains traces of whatever destroyed civilization. And that brings us right back to Gray Goo. What if the disaster never really ended? This is where the theory becomes genuinely disturbing. What if the thing that destroyed the old world didn't completely disappear? What if it simply changed? Maybe the silos were designed to wait until the threat was gone. But what if it never went away? What if the founders didn't know how long humanity would have to remain underground? What if they were guessing? That could explain why there is no obvious end date. No simple countdown. No clear moment where someone says, "The world is safe now." Generation after generation remains underground. People are born there. They grow old there. They die there. And the next generation repeats the same cycle. At some point, the original purpose becomes irrelevant. Only the system survives. And that creates one terrifying possibility. Maybe humanity isn't waiting for the outside to become safe. The question Juliet may soon have to answer. That's why Episode 8 could completely change Juliet's mission. For a long time, the goal was obvious. Get out. But now, the question may become, should anyone get out? And that is far more complicated. Because freedom means nothing if the world outside is still dangerous. Truth means nothing if revealing it destroys the people you're trying to save. And destroying the system means nothing if that system was holding back something even worse. Juliet has spent her entire journey trying to open doors. But what if one of those doors was closed for a reason? What if the founders weren't only keeping humanity inside? What if they were keeping something outside? And that is the question I would keep in mind while watching Episode 8. Because the biggest reveal may not be about who built the silos. It may be about what the silos were built to contain. 10. The final theory. The silos may be part of a much bigger machine. Put all the clues together. Gus has a secret. Charlotte is making a critical decision. Lucas and Kennedy are outside. The safeguard remains active. Juliet is getting closer to the truth. And the episode is called Gray Goo. None of those clues, by themselves, proves anything. But together, they suggest one possibility. The story may be moving away from what happened to humanity and toward what did humanity create? And that distinction could change everything. Maybe the silos weren't simply built after civilization collapsed. Maybe they were part of the solution to a technological catastrophe. Maybe the founders created a controlled environment because they believed uncontrolled technology had made the old world impossible to save. Maybe the people inside aren't prisoners in the traditional sense. Maybe they're survivors inside a system designed to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. But there's one enormous flaw. The people inside were never given the truth.